So in solving this trig equation, we need to get the theta by itself, which is your variable. So the theta is right here. So we have to work from the inside out. So that means the last thing we'll do is we'll divide by 2. And the next to last thing we'll do is take the inverse cosine, which means the first thing we have to do is get rid of this root 2. So let's do that. We do this by division. This is a multiplication problem because there's no plus or minus. So we should know that we need to divide to get rid of that, not subtract. So we've gotten rid of the root 2. So we have cosine of 2 theta is equal to 1 over root 2. Now maybe you do, maybe you don't recognize that. That one's not on your unit circle. But this is also known as, when you rationalize it, root 2 over 2. So we can multiply both sides of the top and bottom by radical 2 and get that. Now I recognize this thing as being on my unit circle, which is great. Because now I have to get rid of the cosine, and I get rid of the cosine by taking the inverse, or the arc cosine, some of you might call it that, of both sides. So on the left, the cosine and the arc cosine cancel each other out. So we're left with 2 theta. And over here, I need to think about, from the unit circle, what angles is the cosine have a value of root 2 over 2. And I know one of them off the top of my head is pi over 4. That is a first quadrant angle where both the x and the y are the same. And the second one, the second place on the unit circle, where the cosine is root 2 over 2, is at 7 pi over 4. Let me erase that 5. That's where it's negative. 7 pi over 4, or 315 degrees in the fourth quadrant, is the other place on the unit circle where the cosine is root 2 over 2. Okay, you have to check all the places on the unit circle where that might happen. So now that I have my angles equal, I can divide by 2, aka multiply by 1/2. Divide by 2, multiply by 1/2. So I get an angle at pi over 8, and I get an angle at 7 pi over 8. Okay, now you might notice, or you might not, that both of these angles are less than 180 degrees. So pi over 8 is like here, and then 7 pi over 8 is like there on your unit circle. Okay, well, half of pi over 4, so like 22.5 degrees, which I didn't draw those very well if they're actually 22.5 degrees. So let's do it better. How about there's 22.5 and here's 22.5. Okay, hopefully your teacher has told you that when this happens, we need to have some other answers to complete our pi over, or rather 2 pi domain. So there is a 180 degree angle across from my pi over 8 at 9 pi over 8, which would also satisfy this. And there is one across from 7 pi over 8, okay, over here, which would be, let's see, 15 pi over 8. Okay, so I'm adding pi to both of these, so that's 8 pi over 8, since we need to have the denominators be the same. So I add 8 pi over 8 to this and get 9, and I add 8 pi over this plus this to get 15. Okay, now these are all the answers, or rather all the angles that, when I multiply them by 2, take the cosine of that, and then multiply that by root 2, I get an answer that is 1.